I never planned on noticing her. That morning, I was just killing time, same cracked leather chair by the window of the neighborhood cafe, same chipped mug the barista handed me without asking. I always thought routines made life easier, predictable. But then she walked in, and the whole place felt like it tilted just slightly, enough for me to feel it but not enough for anyone else to notice. She wasn't dramatic about her presence. No loud voice, no bright colors. Just a woman in her 40s, maybe older, maybe younger depending on the light, wearing a dark coat and carrying a book tucked against her chest. She ordered without looking at the menu, as if she'd been here 100 times, but I'd never seen her before. That detail bothered me. Or maybe it intrigued me. When the barista called her name, she smiled, subtle, almost private. She didn't scan the room for anyone waiting. She just moved to the corner table, slipped her coat over the back of the chair, and sat like she had nowhere else to be. I kept glancing over, trying to make it look like I wasn't. She caught me once, maybe twice. I pretended to check my phone, though the screen was just filled with half-written messages I never sent. A draft to my brother about visiting, another to a friend I hadn't seen in months. I didn't delete them, but I didn't send them either. That's the kind of lonely I was, quiet, self-contained, polite. She broke the silence first. Not with me directly, but with the room. She laughed. Something in the book must have set her off. Not loud, not forced, just real. And I felt it land in my chest like a small knock. Good book? I asked before I could stop myself. My voice sounded rougher than I intended. She looked up, studied me for a second too long. It was, she said, closing it like that chapter was done. There was a pause where I should have let it end, gone back to my coffee, but she tilted her head slightly, almost inviting me in. So I asked, "You come here often?" "I've never seen you before." "Maybe I don't come at the same time as you," she said. A small smirk followed, like she knew more than she was letting on. That smirk made me fold the napkin in front of me, corner to corner, too many times. "Well, I'm probably not your type of company anyway," I muttered, half to myself. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still on me. That's exactly why. I didn't know what to do with that answer. It hung there between us, heavier than it should have been. My first instinct was to laugh it off, but I didn't. She wasn't joking. The barista called another order. A couple at the counter whispered to each other. But the room felt smaller, like it had narrowed down to just the two of us. She picked up her coffee, stood, and walked past my table. Her hand brushed the edge of my chair, not enough to call it deliberate, not enough to call it accidental. As she reached the door, she paused, pulled out her phone, and typed something quickly before slipping it back into her pocket. A second later, mine buzzed on the table. A number I didn't recognize. Just a single line, "Same time tomorrow." I stared at it, the coffee cooling in my hands, wondering how someone could step into your routine and undo it so completely in less than an hour. The next day, I went back earlier than usual. I told myself it was to study, to get a head start on work, to stay out of my own apartment where the walls felt too thin. But the truth was obvious, I was waiting. She showed up 10 minutes after I sat down, same dark coat, same quiet presence. This time, she noticed me first. "You kept the seat warm," she said, sliding into the chair across from me without asking. I almost choked on my coffee. "I didn't know you'd actually come. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't mean it." She pulled out her phone, set it face down on the table like a small act of trust. "You're a student, right?" "Sort of. I take classes. Work part-time too." I shifted, realizing how young that sounded next to her steadiness. "What about you?" She smiled faintly, like she expected the question. "Divorced. 15 years. My son's your age, maybe older. He lives out of state now." Something tightened in my chest. The gap between us suddenly felt visible, like a line on the floor. But she didn't flinch when she said it. She just stirred her tea slowly, watching the swirl of the liquid as though it mattered more than my reaction. I fiddled with the sugar packet, folding it in half, then in half again. So that means, I started, then stopped. That means I've had enough of people telling me what's appropriate, she finished for me. I didn't know what to say to that. My throat felt tight, but I couldn't look away. The cafe wasn't crowded, but the hum of conversations filled the spaces where we didn't speak. I noticed her hands, small, deliberate movements, the way she held her spoon like she was slowing herself down. You don't seem like the kind of person who spends time with someone like me, I said finally, my voice low. She tilted her head. And what kind of person is that? You know. Young. Aimless. Still figuring things out. Her gaze softened, but she didn't argue. Maybe that's the point. For a moment, silence settled. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind where both of us were waiting to see if the other would say more. I pictured her son, someone my age, maybe someone I'd pass on the street without noticing. The thought made my chest heavy. What was I doing, sitting here with his mother, pretending this was harmless? But then she reached across the table, not to touch me but to adjust the sugar packet I'd been mangling. Her fingers brushed mine for the briefest second. Barely contact at all. Yet it sent a quiet jolt through me. Stop overthinking it, she said gently, sliding the packet back toward me. I laughed under my breath, more to cover the heat rising in my face than anything else. She smiled too, a small, knowing curve of her lips. It was nothing, just her hand grazing mine, just a smile shared over ruined sugar. But walking back to my apartment later, the whole world seemed to shift around that moment, as if it carried more weight than I was willing to admit. The next week, our rhythm found a strange sort of pattern. She'd come in around the same time I did, sometimes later, sometimes earlier, but always, there. I never asked if she rearranged her life for it. Maybe she wondered the same about me. That morning, she slid into the chair across from me with her coat still on, cheeks faintly flushed from the wind. She set down her cup, then looked around like she was expecting someone else to walk in. You okay? I asked. Fine, she said too quickly. Her eyes followed the door before settling on me again. Just, long day already. I wanted to press, but something in her expression stopped me. A wall, just high enough to remind me that most of her life existed outside this table. We sat in silence for a while. She unwrapped her tea bag carefully, folding the paper tab back and forth until it tore. I watched her hands, the tiny, restless movements. Finally, she sighed. You know, people notice things. Patterns. Habits. The words hit harder than they should have. Meaning what? Meaning nothing, she said, brushing it off. But her eyes lingered on mine, and the space between us felt thinner than before. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to answer. My heart beat too fast for the quiet moment we were in. The bell above the cafe door rang, and a friend of mine walked in. Not close, just someone I knew from classes. He spotted me, started toward the counter, then glanced at her. At us. He raised his eyebrows slightly, like he was filing it away for later. I felt my stomach drop. She must have noticed too, because her jaw tightened. See, she murmured, half a smile that wasn't really a smile. People notice. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter. That he wouldn't say anything, that it was harmless. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stared at the sugar packets, at the mess of napkins I'd been folding. She leaned back, crossing her arms, creating just enough distance that I felt it like a cold draft. The air shifted. I don't know what this is, I said, my voice lower than I intended. Or what you want it to be. Her eyes softened at that. Not pity, something else. Something I didn't dare name. Neither do I. We both let the silence fill again. My friend left without saying goodbye, but the impression of his glance still lingered. And then, as if to undo the space she'd created, she reached across the table. Her hand brushed the sleeve of my arm, lingering there for a heartbeat too long. The kind of touch that made time stutter. I froze. She didn't move away. Her lips parted like she might say something that could tilt the ground completely. But then she pulled back, fingers curling around her cup instead. "Your coffee's getting cold," she said softly. The moment hung there, half-finished, heavy with everything we hadn't let happen. We didn't meet at the cafe that day. She suggested a walk instead, less eyes, she'd said in the text. I reread that line too many times before replying with a simple okay. It was late afternoon when we met near the park, the light already thinning into that soft gray that makes everything feel quieter. She wore the same dark coat, hands tucked into her pockets. I shoved mine in too, though the cold wasn't the thing making me restless. For a while, we just walked. Leaves crackled underfoot. A kid on a scooter darted past us, his mother calling after him. Ordinary sounds, but all I heard was the space between our footsteps, how they kept falling almost in rhythm. Finally, she broke it. "I saw you with someone the other day. At the cafe." My chest tightened. "Just a friend." "Barely that." "I didn't ask," she said. But her tone betrayed her, too quick, too clipped. I stopped walking, and so did she. "You sounded like you did." Her eyes flicked away, toward the benches near the pond. She motioned, and we sat. The wood was cold beneath us. She exhaled, slow. "It's ridiculous, isn't it? Me caring who you talk to. I shouldn't." I stared at the ripples in the water. "Why shouldn't you?" She hesitated. Then, softer, "Because it's not supposed to matter." The words hung in the fading light. My throat felt dry, but I forced something out. "It matters to me." Her head turned sharply at that. For a second, her guard slipped. She looked younger, vulnerable, like the weight she carried had loosened. "I've been alone a long time," she admitted. "Long enough that I forget what it's like to want something I can't have." She laughed under her breath, but it wasn't humor. "And then you sit there with your folded napkins and your quiet questions, and suddenly I feel 20 again. And foolish." I didn't know what to say. My hands gripped the bench, knuckles tight. Every instinct told me to reach for her, but I stayed frozen. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered, almost to herself. "You won't," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. She turned fully toward me now, eyes steady. The kind of gaze that felt like standing too close to a flame. "You don't know that." The silence stretched, full and fragile. I could feel every inch between us. One lean closer, one slip, and it would change everything. Her hand twitched, resting on the bench between us. Mine did too. They didn't touch, but the gap narrowed until the air felt electric. Her lips parted, as if words were on the edge. My chest burned, waiting. Then, her phone buzzed. She flinched, pulled back instantly, checked the screen without letting me see. The wall rebuilt in seconds. "I should go," she said, standing. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she adjusted her coat. And just like that, the moment collapsed, leaving me staring at the space where she'd been. The next morning, I went to the cafe earlier than usual. I wanted to be there first, wanted her to walk in and see me waiting, like some unspoken answer to what we almost said on that bench. But she didn't come. I stayed through one refill, then another. The seat across from me stayed empty, the window beside it fogging as the day warmed, clearing again as the sun shifted. By the third hour, I stopped pretending to check my phone for work messages. I was checking only for hers. Nothing. That night, I typed, "Did I say something wrong?" I stared at the blinking cursor, the draft waiting to be sent. After 5 minutes, I deleted it. 2 days passed. 3. On the 4th, I saw her, but not at the cafe. She was across the street outside a bookstore, talking to a man I didn't recognize. Older, maybe her age. He laughed at something she said, touched her arm lightly. She didn't pull away. I froze in place, half hidden behind the awning of a corner store. My chest tightened as if I'd been caught doing something wrong, even though I hadn't moved. She didn't see me. Or if she did, she gave no sign. That night, I almost texted again. Can we talk? I wrote it, stared at it, erased it. Instead, I scrolled up through our short thread of messages, her first one, the simple same time tomorrow, and felt the sting of how quickly a routine could vanish. By the end of the week, I stopped going to the cafe. At least, not in the mornings. I told myself I was too busy, that I had to save money, that coffee at home was just as good. But the truth was simpler, I couldn't sit there staring at an empty chair anymore. Still, my eyes betrayed me. I checked every time I passed the windows. Sometimes I thought I saw her, coat draped over the back of a chair, hair catching the light, but it was always someone else. One night, late, my phone buzzed. A message. My heart jumped. But it wasn't her. Just a classmate reminding me about a group project. I muted the thread without answering. Lying in bed, I drafted something again, I keep looking for you. The words glowed in the dark screen, fragile and too honest. My thumb hovered over, send. I didn't. Instead, I locked the phone and set it face down, the room lit only by the glow slipping through the blinds. The silence pressed in heavy, the same kind of silence she used to break with a small laugh, a casual question. The next morning, I walked past the cafe on my way to class. The table by the window was empty. The seat across from me stayed waiting. And I kept walking. It was raining the night she finally knocked. Not loud, not urgent. Just 2 soft raps on my door, the kind you almost mistake for the pipes or the wind. I opened it expecting nothing, and there she was, damp hair clinging to her cheek, coat darkened at the shoulders. I shouldn't be here, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not, one clutching the strap of her bag, the other twisting the edge of her sleeve. I stepped aside anyway. She walked in, dripping faintly on the floor, and stood in the middle of my kitchen like she didn't know where to put herself. I offered her a towel, but she shook her head. I don't want tea, or coffee. Not this time. I leaned against the counter, waiting. My heart beat too loudly for the quiet space between us. She let out a breath, shaky. I've been trying to stay away. To tell myself it was just, nothing. A distraction. Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp for a moment, then softened. But it isn't nothing. And I'm too old to pretend otherwise. I swallowed hard, searching for words that didn't sound like a mistake. I thought I did something wrong. That night at the bench, when you left, you didn't, she cut in, too quickly. Then, gentler, you didn't. The silence stretched again. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. I folded my arms across my chest, not to block her out, but to keep from reaching forward too fast. She took a step closer. The distance shrank, but so did her voice. This, whatever this is, it's not fair to you. You're at the beginning. I'm, somewhere in the middle. And people would talk. They already notice. I don't care what they say, I answered. The words came out rough, unpracticed. I care if you're here. That's it. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching. For hesitation, for immaturity, for something that would let her retreat again. But there wasn't any. I was terrified, but steady. Her shoulders lowered, the fight in her posture giving way. Do you have any idea how much this scares me? She whispered. Yeah, I said. Me too. The space between us disappeared then, not in a rush, but in a quiet surrender. Her hand reached first, brushing mine on the counter, tentative, trembling. I turned mine over, let her fingers settle into my palm. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. For the longest time, we just stood there, her hand in mine, the rain steady outside, the kitchen dim except for the weak light above the stove. Finally, she smiled, small, tired, but real. Okay, she said. And that was enough. Weeks slipped by after that night in my kitchen. Not dramatic weeks, no sweeping declarations, no stormy arguments. Just mornings and evenings that found new patterns, quiet adjustments where her presence started to fold into mine. Sometimes we still met at the cafe, though not every day. When we did, she'd order tea, I'd order my usual black coffee, and neither of us pretended it was coincidence anymore. We didn't sit by the window as often. Instead, we chose a corner table, the one with the slightly uneven leg. She'd nudge her napkin under it without saying a word, a ritual we both grew to expect. Other times, it was her kitchen instead of mine. She'd slice fruit while I made the tea, and we'd bump shoulders without apology. Once, I found myself washing dishes while she leaned against the counter, telling me about a book she'd just finished. I don't remember the book now, but I remember her voice, steady, soft, like she'd stopped bracing for me to disappear. There were pauses, of course. Days she'd retreat a little, remembering the years between us, or the son she rarely spoke about but always carried with her. And there were days I pulled back too, second-guessing what I could possibly offer someone who already knew so much of life. But we kept returning. To the bench in the park, to the table at 8:47 a.m., to the unspoken space where fear met longing and settled into something else. One evening, we walked past the pond where we'd almost said too much months ago. The same wooden bench waited, worn by weather, steady in its place. She sat first, smoothing her coat, and I joined her. The silence stretched the way it used to, but this time it didn't press on us. It felt full, companionable. You still fold napkins when you're nervous, she said after a while, her mouth curving faintly. And you still tear the teabag strings, I replied. She laughed then, soft, her eyes catching mine. Some things don't change. Some do, I said. And without thinking, I reached for her hand. She let me. No hesitation this time. The air cooled as the sun lowered, the water rippling under a faint breeze. We sat there, fingers intertwined, not needing to name what this was anymore. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and it was ours. Later, when I walked her home, she paused at her door. Same time tomorrow, she asked, the words familiar but layered with new meaning. I smiled, leaning against the frame. Always. She unlocked the door, glanced back once more, and that glance carried the whole history of how we'd gotten here, the empty chairs, the folded napkins, the near misses, the rain. And I knew then that love didn't have to be loud to last. Sometimes it was as simple as showing up, again and again, until it became the quiet center of your life.